Do you need to perform actions in SharePoint from Power Automate, but a service account is not an option? Looking for a more enterprise-ready solution? Don't want to worry about passwords? Today, I'll show you how to use a SharePoint connector I have built using the Microsoft Graph API. I will show you how to install it and use it to create folders and set item permissions. I'm TechTweedie, let's get started. So over in the Entra Admin Center, we're going to click on Applications. Then we're going to click on App Registrations. And then we're going to create a new registration. We're going to call our registration SharePoint Demo 1 Power Automate. We're then going to leave all the other settings at their default options. Next, we're going to add an API permission. To do this, click on API permissions and then click Add a permission. The one we're going to need today is Microsoft Graph. We're going to select that and we're going to choose Application. Next, we're going to search for sites.selected. Now this permission allows us to give our app registration access to a particular site instead of giving it access across our whole SharePoint Online environment. Next, we're going to grant admin consent for this. Now, I have permission to do this as this is my tenant, but this may be something you have to ask someone else to grant for you. Next, we're going to grab our SharePoint ID. To do this, we go to our SharePoint site, and then we just copy and paste this in for my blog, which is API site, and then we're going to select ID. And then if we look in this XML, we can see we've got ID here at the end, and then we've got this GUID nut. We just copy that GUID. We're going to need that in just a few minutes. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to pop across to Microsoft Graph. And we're just going to sign in, which gives us access to our tenant. And we're just going to test that that's working. There we go, we got a nice response, so I can see that the me endpoint is working. So today we're going to need to do a post request. We're going to copy and paste in some commands from my blog. The first one we're going to do is permissions, and this is where we need this site ID. I'm just going to paste that in there, and then we're going to put something in our payload. Before we can go any further, we need to grant some permissions to ourselves in the context of Microsoft Graph, and the one we're going to use is sites full control all. Just going to authorize that for myself. Fantastic. Next, we're going to copy our client ID. And what we're doing here is we're saying that for this particular SharePoint site, we want this app registration to have access. I'm also going to copy the display name just because it helps me to keep things linked together, but you can put any value in you want here. We're going to run that. Next, we're going to create our custom connector. Now I've supplied a Swagger file, which you can copy and paste in. And you can just import it from GitHub. Once you access it, you'll be able to see your custom connector in your environment. A couple of things we need to check. We need to make sure we've got enable service principal support. And we need to create a secret. I'm going to copy this value. I'm going to paste it in the client secret. Leave that page open because we're going to need to go back to it again in a moment. And we're just going to need our client ID as well. Paste that in. Fantastic. For resource URL, it's graph.microsoft.com. And then we're going to press on create connector. Yep, yeah, everything's correct. Just going to create connector. And then we're going to hit test. And we're just going to create a new connection. Now, if you don't get this screen, if it pops up with just an OAuth username and password, then we just need to go back to make sure we've ticked enable service principal support. Now in here, we're going to pop our client ID in again. We're going to pop our directory ID or our tenant ID. And then we're going to pop our secret in. Now, that's why we keep that window open, because once you close that secret window, you can never get back to it again. You have to create a new secret. If I just come back here and refresh, we can see we've created our service, our connection using our app registration. Next, we're going to pop some site information in for the particular SharePoint site we want to access. Just copy and paste these values in, do a test. You can see I'm able to access that site now. Let's see if we can access the site drives. Pop the site in. It returns to me each of the document libraries known as site drives in the Graph API. And I have an ID for each site drive. I can take that ID and I can do things like add a folder. So if I pop the site ID in and this drive ID, I give it a name. I just pop the name in there as well. If I test this operation, we can see that we've got an item ID. We've created a folder on that SharePoint site. Now what we can do now is we can add permissions for that folder. We're going to set it to require sign in, send an invitation, and the account we're going to do is demo@tweed.technology. You can see we've run that operation and it's come back successful, so it's granted permission. And we can see that I've had an email as well to say I've been invited to that site. So let's try this out in a Power Automate flow. Maybe you want to hook it, oh, wrong one. Maybe you want to hook it in some way up to a model-driven app to provide access to a SharePoint site. Because maybe we're using access teams for our particular implementation. What we're going to do is we're going to, if I can decide which one I'm going to use, I'm going to add a user to an item. And we've got a slightly nicer interface than the testing screen we were looking at here. We pop our site ID in. Let's pop our drive ID in and our item ID. We can populate the same pieces of information in here. And if we just use to compose, you can see we get all those values back out again. Now we need the permission ID if we want to remove it. So if we are using this inside a model-driven app, for instance, you'll need to save that permission ID somewhere, or you'll have to go and find it again. So let's say we're going to add someone to access a SharePoint site, SharePoint folder, sorry, because they've got access to a particular record or they're in a particular access team or ownership group, and at some point we may want to remove it. So we'd need to save that ID back to somewhere in data first. Let's give this a test. And as you can see, we have our test message through. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add another action. And this one's going to be to site drives. We're going to pop in our site ID here. Then we're going to filter our site drives because we're looking for one drive in particular. We're going to filter it on a particular name. And we want the site drive that's called test. If we give this flow a test now, you can see we've returned a JSON array of objects. Or sorry, we get a JSON array of objects. And then we should only have one object that comes back. The next step we're going to do is we're going to add a folder to this SharePoint site. So we could be doing this because we've had a claims record added to our environment, or we've had a new contract added to our model-driven app, and we want to set some permissions that line up with what's inside of our model-driven app. So we're going to add a folder, and we're going to call this folder test3. Put the name in twice. And we'll give that a test to see if it works. And as we can see, going back to SharePoint, we've got a folder that's been created a few moments ago. The next action we're going to do is we're going to set some permissions for this folder we've just created. And we're going to need some of these same items of information again, such as site ID, drive ID, and item ID for the item we've just created. A lot of the time in my solutions, I will store the item ID back. So if I've got records in Dataverse which are associated directly with SharePoint folder, I'll store that item ID back on that record. So when I need to add another user or remove permission, I know which item ID I'm addressing. And then the drive ID and the site ID I usually keep as environment variables. So I'm just going to give a little message to our user to say it's a test message. I'm going to require them to sign in, and I'm going to send an invitation. And the role I'm going to give them is read. I just press save on that. Let's test. Okay, it's failed. Failed to add the folder because the name already exists. Okay. Change that from test3 to test4. Give that another test. Now let's give that one. And as we can see, we've been successfully able to add an item permission. Thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe and stay safe.